By September of 1776, the American Revolution was pretty much over. A string of humiliating defeats had left George Washington's Continental Army in shambles. Just weeks earlier, they had been crushed at the Battle of Long Island, losing more than 2,000 men. What followed was a miraculous nighttime escape from Brooklyn to Manhattan, but let's be clear, it was a retreat, not a victory. The dream of independence, so vibrantly declared back in July, was on the verge of being extinguished. General William Howe, commander of the most powerful army on the planet, held New York City, the strategic heart of the colonies. His troops were confident, well-fed, and completely dismissive of the so-called rebels. Washington's army, on the other hand, was a wreck. It was bleeding soldiers from desertions, expiring enlistments, and a crippling lack of basic supplies like shoes, blankets, and gunpowder. They were less a unified force and more a collection of state militias, often more loyal to their home colonies than to the idea of a nation. For Washington, this wasn't just a strategic crisis, it was personal. He was losing the confidence of his men and maybe even himself. Holed up on the rocky defensive ground of Harlem Heights in northern Manhattan, he and his shattered army weren't planning their next great attack. They were preparing for annihilation. But Washington was about to get an unexpected opportunity. A desperate, last-ditch gamble that would either save the revolution or end it for good. To really get how deep this crisis was, you have to understand the sheer chaos of the past few weeks. The campaign of 1776, which started so promisingly with the liberation of Boston, had turned into a complete nightmare. After landing on Long Island, General Howe masterfully outmaneuvered the Americans, pulling off a daring flank attack that totally unhinged the Continental line. The American command was caught completely flat-footed, and the defeat was total. The retreat to Manhattan was followed by something even more mortifying: the British landing at Kips Bay on September 15th. As British warships unleashed a terrifying naval bombardment, the American militia defending the shore simply broke and ran without firing a shot. They dropped their muskets and fled in a wild, panicked stampede. Washington, riding toward the sound of the guns, was met with a scene of absolute pandemonium. He was incandescent with fury. He threw his hat on the ground, shouting, "Are these the men with which I am to defend America?" He drew his sword and pistol to try and rally the terrified men, reportedly getting within 100 yards of the advancing enemy before his aides grabbed his horse's bridle and pulled him to safety. If they hadn't, the war might have ended right then and there. This disastrous retreat forced Washington to abandon New York City, surrendering it to the British. He gathered what was left of his forces, exhausted, sick, and demoralized, on the northern plateau of Manhattan known as Harlem Heights. It was good defensive ground, but it felt less like a fortress and more like a cage. The British held everything to the south. Their ships controlled the rivers. The Continental Army was cornered. The army itself was on the verge of falling apart. Soldiers from different states eyed each other with suspicion. Sickness was rampant. Rations were unpredictable, and with winter coming, the men had no proper clothing or shelter. Washington's letters to Congress were filled with grim reality. He was trying to hold together an army that was evaporating before his eyes. The British, meanwhile, were so sure of their inevitable victory that a peace conference had been held just days before, with Admiral Richard Howe basically offering pardons for surrender. The revolution wasn't just failing. By any rational measure, it was already lost. All that was left was the final, decisive blow. General Howe thought that blow was coming any day. He was wrong. The morning of September 16, 1776, started like any other. Before dawn, Washington made a routine call. He ordered a small reconnaissance party to probe the British lines and gather intel. This wasn't a grand offensive, it was a simple scouting mission. To lead it, he chose one of his best officers, Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Nolton. Nolton was a seasoned veteran from Connecticut, a hero from the Battle of Bunker Hill. Washington had even authorized him to create an elite unit called Nolton's Rangers, the first organized intelligence gathering force in the Continental Army. Think of them as America's first special forces. Nathan Hale, the famous Patriot spy, was one of them. Leading about 150 of his Rangers, Nolton moved south from Harlem Heights into a low-lying valley known as the Hollow Way. Today, it's the area around 125th Street in Manhattan. As the sun rose, Nolton's men stumbled upon British pickets. A sharp skirmish broke out. The Rangers, outnumbered by advancing British light infantry and the elite 42nd Highlanders, the Black Watch, did what they were trained to do. They fought a delaying action and fell back toward the American lines. But the British didn't just pursue. They mocked them. As the Americans retreated, the supremely arrogant British light infantry began to sound their bugles. They weren't playing military calls. They were playing "Gone Away," the fox hunt call used when the fox has been flushed from cover. It was a calculated insult, a bit of psychological warfare aimed straight at the man they saw as a provincial farmer playing general, George Washington. On the Heights, American officers heard the bugle calls and seethed. Adjutant General Joseph Reed, who was with Washington, reportedly exclaimed, "I never felt such a sensation before. It seemed to crown our disgrace." But the insult had the opposite effect the British intended. It didn't break the American spirit. It enraged them. It lit a fire under Washington. The British had made a critical mistake. Their arrogance had given him an opportunity. Seeing their overconfident troops advancing far from their main lines, Washington saw his chance for a counterattack. This was the gamble. It was an audacious, impulsive plan born of pure indignation. He'd send a small force to feign an attack, a diversion to fix the British in place. At the same time, he'd send Nolton's Rangers, reinforced with Virginia riflemen under Major Andrew Leech, on a wide flanking maneuver to get behind the British, trap them, and destroy them. It was a complex pincer movement, incredibly risky with such an inexperienced army. But for the first time in weeks, Washington wasn't just reacting. He was attacking. The plan was in motion. A small brigade moved forward to engage the British head-on, drawing their full attention. This was the feint, designed to hold the enemy in place while the real trap was sprung. Meanwhile, Thomas Nolton and Andrew Leech led their combined force of roughly 200 elite Rangers and Virginia riflemen on the critical flanking march through the rocky, wooded terrain of Upper Manhattan. The whole plan depended on them getting into the enemy's rear undetected. Washington himself rode to a forward vantage point, telescope in hand, taking a huge personal risk to direct the battle. But then the plan went wrong. In the confusion, an unidentified officer seems to have given a bad order. The flanking party turned too early. Instead of appearing behind the British, they hit their flank, losing the crucial element of surprise. The perfect trap was gone. The skirmish exploded into a full-blown firefight. Despite the error, the Americans attacked with a ferocity the British hadn't seen before. Nolton, a man who always led with, "Come on, boys," instead of "Go on, boys," was at the very front. As he urged his men forward, he was struck by a musket ball and fell, mortally wounded. Not long after, Major Leech also went down with a fatal wound. In a matter of moments, the Americans had lost both commanders. It was a devastating blow that should have shattered the attack. But it didn't. Fueled by weeks of humiliation and enraged by the loss of their leaders, the soldiers kept fighting. Washington, seeing the battle's intensity, doubled down. He fed reinforcements into the fight, sending in troops from Maryland and New England. In total, about 1,800 American soldiers would pour into the fight. The British, who started the day with arrogant bugle calls, were now isolated, outnumbered, and in serious trouble. The same American troops who had fled in terror at Kips Bay were now standing their ground, trading volleys with Britain's elite light infantry and driving back the famed Black Watch Highlanders in an open field. For the British, the shock was profound. For over an hour, the battle raged across a buckwheat field near what is today Barnard College. Under relentless pressure, the British line finally broke. They began to fall back, their retreat growing more desperate as the Americans pursued them. The Continental soldiers were eager to push on, but Washington knew he couldn't risk a full-scale battle with Howe's main force. He'd won the skirmish, bloodied the enemy's nose, and made his point. He sent an aide with orders to disengage. With a loud huzzah, the American soldiers, their discipline holding, broke off the attack and returned to their lines in good order. The fighting was over. This story of resilience, of snatching victory from the jaws of defeat, is at the very heart of history. If you find these moments as fascinating as we do, and want to make sure you don't miss our next exploration into the past, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell. As the sun set, the fields of Harlem Heights fell silent. In tactical terms, the battle was a small affair. American casualties were about 30 killed and 100 to 150 wounded. British losses are disputed, but estimates range from 90 killed and up to 300 wounded. The strategic situation didn't fundamentally change. The British still held New York, and Washington's army was still trapped on Manhattan. But the Battle of Harlem Heights was never about territory. It was about psychology. And in that, it was a staggering American victory. The impact on the Continental Army was immediate and profound. Washington called it a pretty sharp skirmish, but noted its success had a surprising and almost incredible effect upon our whole army. Adjutant General Joseph Reed wrote to his wife, "You can hardly conceive the change it has made in our army." For the first time, the Continental Army had met British regulars in open combat and forced them to retreat. They had seen the backs of the fearsome redcoats. This single fight proved that the British were not invincible and that American soldiers could stand up to the best troops in the world. It also fostered cooperation, as Virginians, New Englanders, and Marylanders fought side by side as one army. For the British, the battle was a rude awakening. Their commander, Sir Henry Clinton, grumbled that the ungovernable impetuosity of the light troops drew us into this scrape. Their arrogance had cost them dearly and shown them that the rebels they disdained could put up a real fight. Of course, the victory came at a cost. Major Andrew Leech succumbed to his wounds. And Colonel Thomas Nolton, the quiet hero from Connecticut, died that day. His last words were reportedly, "I do not value my life if we do but get the day." Washington lamented his death in his general orders, calling him a man who would have been an honor to any country. Nolton got his wish. The Americans got the day. The Battle of Harlem Heights didn't win the American Revolution. In the weeks that followed, Washington's army was forced to retreat from Manhattan, across New Jersey, and into Pennsylvania. The darkest days of the war, the freezing winter and the desperate crossing of the Delaware, were still ahead. Harlem Heights wasn't the big, strategic victory. That would come 3 months later, at the legendary Battle of Trenton. But this skirmish was Washington's first battlefield success of the war, and it was the crucial shot of adrenaline that saved the army from psychological collapse. It was a desperate gamble that paid off at the moment of greatest despair. It proved to the world, to the British, and most importantly, to the Americans themselves, that the Continental Army was far from defeated, and that the fight for independence, against all odds, would go on.